incentives. How many times have you ever had a sales incentive plan, Marcus, that says, and I need you to do things this year, but I also need you to be building for next year, and I need you to be thinking about sustainability in your sales ecosystem for next year? It doesn't happen. A friend of mine's son got released from a role, highest performing salesperson in the company, but wasn't making enough cold calls, because the mandate was, you've got to do 100 cold calls a week. I don't think salespeople are valued by their own companies. As buyers sit in a company probably with a sales force of their own. And what I find mystifying is, why don't they turn around and go, when I buy from our suppliers, this is what I value. Do you go and do that?
Hello and welcome back once again to the Inquisitor Podcast with me, Marcus Cauchi. Today my guest is Andy Hough. Andy is one of the co-founders of the ISP. He's a tireless advocate for sales as a profession, and he's currently doing his doctorate, and he's sat through many hundreds of hours of sales meetings. He's led teams, he's carried a target, and today we're going to be talking about why sales is less than trusted and what we can do in order to address that. Because sales is a profession, it is the oldest profession. And today what we're going to do is we're going to have a no-holds-barred conversation about what we are doing to create the conditions where buyers do not feel safe and can't trust us, how we create pressure, and what are the inputs and the catalysts for creating the disconnect between us and our customers. So without any further ado, Andy, welcome.
Thank you. Great to be here, Marcus.
Excellent. Before we get into the meat and gristle of all of this, could you give us 60 to 90 seconds on your history so people understand your background?
Yeah, I started accidentally in sales at Lloyd's, then moved to what I still consider one of my favourite jobs, which was selling asset finance in Barclays Mercantile up in Manchester. From there, kind of ended into Sun Microsystems in a joint venture with GE, which led me, after a little bit of a challenge and not enjoying it, into 16 years in EMC, which is now part of Dell. 14 years ago, I co-founded what was then the Association of Professional Sales. We merged that with the Institute of Sales Management and became the ISP. Probably our worst ever marketing program ever. We just took a letter from each one and wanked sales in there. And 4 years ago, I started my doctorate in adaptability of salespeople and its impact on performance. And then 3 years ago, started lecturing at Cranfield University and became part of the Global Sales Science Institute. So I love being in both kind of parallel worlds of academia and then translating that into something that means something in the real world. So sellers can start to get back to what I experienced in the 90s, which is it being a really cool, fun job to do.
Well, let's start with that. Why has sales become more of a grind than perhaps it should be?
I think expectations. So if I go back to that role, there was certainly nowhere near the level of technology. In fact, actually, we didn't even have a mobile phone. We had two in the office between six of us. The email was very rudimentary. We still did a lot of stuff by fax. Forecasting was a spreadsheet and a conversation, and the manager sat in with the team. Very hands-on, very enjoyable, because you learned from your colleagues, you had fun, you enjoyed going out and seeing customers and doing discovery, which is the absolute best thing in the world, because who just doesn't love to talk about their company and what they do and what they've put their blood, sweat and tears into. And so it was at its purest, I think, and it was just coming off the curve then. And what's happened now is an expectation that all of that is not as necessary. It's about the sales technology. It's about a silver bullet process, and it's about action, 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 because we need more and more and more return from our salespeople. And to be fair, that's not just the shareholders. That's some senior leadership also putting taxation on salespeople, putting insurance numbers on. So what we've really done is moved away, Marcus, from salespeople being people to them being a number. And that's driven a lot of buyer changes in behavior. They know that now, and they think if it's about a number and I'm a number, then I'm not going to behave necessarily like a person.
So let's define a couple of things. First of all, what is sales? Let's get right down to the basics.
When I started, it was very much about having a conversation to explore where the things that you could offer and do would be of value to the organization. And that exploration often led you to, it wasn't necessarily the feature and the function, it was the outcome. So to give an example, I was lending money for people to buy assets, asset finance. And in reality, the money was, and I know it sounds a bit bizarre, it wasn't necessarily the solution in itself. So to give an example around that, I worked with a lovely lady called Pauline, who was the CFO for a non-fault accident hire company. What they did, Marcus, is they had two bits to the company. They had a set of solicitors. So if you had an accident and it wasn't your fault, they would handle your case on behalf of the insurers. And on the other side of the equation, they would set cars and they would give you a car to replace your car while it was in the shop. And the bit was you would lend them money for the cars, and they bought cars en masse. Like they would buy 100 at a time. And the money was relatively irrelevant. She could get money from Midland, NatWest, Barclays, anywhere. What transpired is that her people would go to ADT, the auctioneers, and they needed the finance before the end of the day. So it wasn't about just the money, it was about the service to be able to get them the money so they could get the cars from ADT the next day and into their fleet operations, because that allowed them to make money. And so it was about the service of that money. It wasn't just about the money. And because you understood that, you were able to then put things in place that always meant that that mechanism was there. And if you were out of the office on holiday, your colleagues would pick it up because they understood it. And it was that level of really digging into the business and understanding what makes her business work and what you could do to facilitate the outcome that I think has been lost. Today, we don't really look at outcomes. We look at products and features. We look at, processes, and we try and convince people that this is what they need. And it's actually, no, that exploration and discovery has dropped right the way off. And it's almost, let me broadcast to you and stop me when you like it, when you want to buy. And it's like, that's really driven buyers to disengage.
So long story short, it's discovering what and where your offer creates meaningful value for your customer and aligning yourself with the outcome that the customer is hiring and creating a de-risked solution that they can live with, that also delivers the functionality that they're looking for.
Yeah. I mean, so the head of Dell, great guy, Adrian McDonald, shout out to him. He taught me a few things, but one of the things he always said, Marcus, was when you are in a position to guide buyers, one of the things that you need to understand is that every company on the planet it's a brand and it's a factory. And your outcome needs to do something positively to their brand, and it needs to make their factory more efficient. And when I say factory, even a bank is a factory, takes in the raw material of cash, does a whole lot of processes to it, etc., lends it, all of those things. And out the other end, theoretically, comes cash and profit. It doesn't always work that way, but so it's the viewpoint of anything you do has to make that process, that factory more efficient, or you're doing something to de-risk or enhance their brand. And if you start to think of things just at that fundamental before you even engage with customers, two things happen. A, you start talking about outcomes, not features and functions and what your product does, but it's actually what benefits they will get. And also you end up higher in the conversation stack. Because if you talk about features and functions of a car or an IT set, you get relegated to who the hell you sound like. And you get relegated into the operations people who aren't making the decisions anyway. They're just evaluating all the possible alternatives and then bringing them back up. And you're not in those conversations. So I think, we're putting the layers on the onion here. It's that lack of discovery, that lack of understanding, that lack of outcome positioning, that, what is the impact that you're going to give them? And actually having that credibility to sound like that trusted advisor, the C-suite person. That doesn't mean you're the C-suite of Sainsbury's all the time. The C-suite of a business that employs 200 people is still a C-suite. And if you sound like them and you sound credible, they will trust you to be guiding them through all the alternatives.
So again, to summarize, discovery before advocacy, outcomes before features, service reliability over price,
Yep.
and risk reduction as part of value. Because what we've got to do is understand how they make their money, how you can help them protect their margin, their reputation, their outcomes, where they carry risk, and what has to happen operationally for them to win. It's definitely not about the obsession with technology, metrics, activity, and where I think you've really highlighted, process doesn't replace curiosity. Busyness and activity don't replace understanding. And the moment we do any of those things, sellers just become a number, and the customer becomes a number at the end of a long chain of abuse.
Yeah. So coming back to you were my manager. You were sat literally 10 yards away. You would come on meetings with me to observe and coach. You'd understand what is behind the numbers that I'm giving you. You'd understand what's the relationship I had with the people that were on the forecast. What were their needs? What were their requirements? You got quite a lot of customer intimacy with my customers because you were intimate in terms of the operating system, the office that I'm in. What sort of a sudden happened is, to your point, to steal your word, numbers. We've become fixated in numbers and the speed and ever quickness to get to numbers. So when I started, I'm sure when you started, there was an understanding that you had to spend a lot of time with a salesperson to get them up to a level of productivity and capability. Now it's we want them there in 90 days. Well, there's great work by Young, who did a paper in 2016, which said actually to get in any, he didn't look at sales because he didn't class it as a profession, but to get to expert status takes 20 years. Yet the way we treat salespeople as numbers today is completely obvious to the buyer before they even meet a salesperson. We want them, capable in 90 days. Why? Because there's a huge community on LinkedIn that says, I am going to get your sales force to be productive in 90 days so you can crush your competition and kill the deal and smash your targets. All wonderful language that is used in a lens that reinforces why buyers are going, well, that person's coming in and they've got a complete win at all costs mindset. Well, my mindset is I've got a problem. It might be not as well defined as I think it is. So I need maybe a trusted advisor to unpick and challenge that in a professional way. But actually, the lens that you're giving me is that it is about you, not me. Now, interestingly, when you and I started, we didn't have the option to broadcast that. And there wasn't that lens because LinkedIn didn't exist. So LinkedIn has become almost as much as an asset as it has a problem, because we don't understand that it's a public shop window. And if you want buyers to trust you, you need to be putting things on there as a salesperson, which really does mean that you are professional and polished, and that you could be trusted to be engaged early, to give a very different set of interactions.
So what are the factors that deliver psychological safety so that one human being can trust another?
So again, there's some really interesting work. A really good guy, Dr. Mark Holyoke, talked about vulnerability. Authenticity is clearly there. The ability to say, I'm here to explore something and I want a relationship with you that isn't necessarily going to start with any economic transaction, because it might not be right for you today. You might be better off staying where you are or better off going here. And actually, we'll build something that is a better way for you to start with us in the next 6 months. I've never heard of anybody now walking away from transactions. You will keep flogging a transaction. The only person that walks away from him is the buyer. Never a salesperson to say, this isn't an opportunity for me.
Well, I think you've touched on something that's really critical, which is the whole concept of trustworthiness. And in our social lives, in our normal lives, we don't generally just give our trust to somebody. Why would anybody expect a salesperson who's incentivized on a quarterly basis to be active to a certain target and generate revenue? What possible thinking goes behind management and leadership in the belief that that's going to work?
Well, it's a bit like a feeding frenzy. So it starts with now an expectation which is fed by shareholders and private equity that we need a return more quickly. We need a return now that is double-digit rapid growth. Not having to go at PE. Some of my greatest friends are in there. But that is one. So it's a numbers game again. Back to numbers have to be accelerated. Therefore, everything, if it's a number here, flows down through numbers. And at the bottom, it's about number of days to productivity. And so if everything's about a number, you then have technology saying, I'll get you to that number. You then have methodologists saying, I'll get you to that number. And they don't see the light of the wood for the trees, because fundamentally it's all about the number. And there's 4,000 sales technologies saying, if you buy me, your sales team will get to this number. There's a whole bunch of methodologies. If you buy me, you will get to this number. And everybody now knows. I had lunch with somebody yesterday and they said, I know it's about the people. Yeah, if you're a sales leader, you've got product and price easily replicable, both of them. You've got process and you've got platforms, there's technology that these processes sit on. You've got people, as in where you sell or who you sell to, and the place, which is where they are. But I know the people, the real people difference is my people, my salespeople, because none of them can be replicated if I've got the right people. You miss that because I don't have time. It's about all of those things, numbers, numbers, numbers. And nobody wants to hear me say it's about the people. Yeah, it's about the people. Because it's all soft and it's not instant. And therefore I need something instantly. I can't say to my shareholders this year that I have hit my goal if I'm focused on how do I help my salespeople learn and be more professional, because it will build a better relationship. And then it comes down to numbers again, which is, incentives. How many times have you ever had a sales incentive plan, Marcus, that says, I need you to do things this year, but I also need you to be building for next year. And I need you to be thinking about sustainability in your sales ecosystem for next year. It doesn't happen. It's not what they do.
Well, you touched on methodologies, and I think it's not so much the methodologies themselves are bad, but it's how they're deployed. And it will harm trust if it's used as a means of control instead of guidance. And I think very often things like Medic and Bant and Sandler and so on are used to suppress the seller's judgment. And they optimize for reporting instead of reality.
Yeah.
No harm, absolutely, in having a structure to your conversation. Just wandering off willy-nilly, that's winging it and hope and a prayer, which seems to be the most popular methodology out there. But too much rigidity creates the sense that you're being corralled and the seller is robotic. And those are not conducive to creating trust. So I think what we need to do is look at intent and leadership next. When a seller shows up, is their intent to transact, or is their intent to establish a relationship and identify a customer for life? And what pressure are they feeling from leadership that is causing them to sit on one side of that fence or the other?
So I think the expectations of salespeople have changed dramatically. And I think the short-term pressure, everyone's measured on monthly metrics, Salesforce is easily interrogated, means that because leaders want instant outcomes, because shareholders want instant outcomes, the reality about it is that the fence to the side they're sitting on is you're not measured on long term, you're measured on what you sell this year. And the moment day 2 of the year is done, you're already less than 12 months. So the time then shrinks and the pressure becomes even more and more and more and more and more throughout the year. So it's almost like being on a treadmill you can't get off. Fundamentally, it's there. And then sales leaders are under the same amount of pressure. There's other things that happen like over-quoting, which don't help that. But the reality about it is it's all about you need to evidence fundamentally that you are going to hit your goal and going to hit your metrics this month, next month, this quarter, this half year, this year. And no one's looking behind those. Nobody looks at the quality. Everyone looks at the quantity. A friend of mine's son got released from a role, highest performing salesperson in the company, but wasn't making enough cold calls because the mandate was you've got to do 100 cold calls a week. And he was like, well, yeah, I can, but that's a quantity. What you want to measure me on is the quality of the calls that actually then lead through the pipeline. And he was ahead of everybody else. But somebody said, well, yeah, but how much more could you be ahead if you did 100 calls? No, doesn't work like that. It's the quality that drives the outcome. If you think quality can then be added to quantity, you don't understand the equation. But they still let him go. And then that comes back to, yes, it's incentives. Yes, it's all short-termism in the incentives. There's that £800 gorilla in the room, Marcus, that most people are now not going to stay in an organization for more than 3 years. Sometimes it's even less than 2. The correlation between those that do stay is it's promotion. So the ones that can navigate through either through performance or politics to get up to management tend to do quite well. So actually, I've got no loyalty to this individual. I don't need to develop this individual because they'll be gone within 2 years. So that's kind of, as a leader, you're broken as well. You're not actually creating a sustainable model. What you're doing is you're creating a model on short-term numbers that are measured, that you hope will get signed off, that hope will relieve the pressure, and then you ignore all the sustainable things that you should be doing. That means you could stay there as a leader for 5 years as a respected C-suite in the organization yourself, because you've reduced unwanted attrition, you're promoting the right people, they've got growth mindset, they come to work to live, but they're also successful. There's less mental pressure on them. And they're delighting clients and customers, to your point. All that stacks up to lifelong customers. And if Andy leaves, Marcus can step in, and the customers go, well, I loved Andy, but if he's kind of a signal as to what a great culture that company's got, Marcus will be pretty much the same. So brilliant. Let's keep this thing going. And all of those metrics that we had 30 years ago, all of those things are gone.
Well, what I'm taking from what you've said aligns closely with what I teach, which is that the sales organization or the vendor organization and the customer need to be on the same team. It's us and them against their problems. And within the go-to-market function, everyone from product, marketing, finance, customer success, operations, marketing, sales, management, and leadership are all part of the same organism. And if they are not aligned around the customer and what the customer wants and needs, then odds are that disconnect will be projected to the customer and to partners as well. Mustn't forget them. And the net result is that we end up creating forecast and pipeline theatre. We create lower value for shareholders because a customer for life is significantly more profitable and more predictable than trying to go out and every month, every quarter, every year, trying to start afresh. So how do we get that message across to leadership and shareholders that they're effectively destroying alpha and they're killing the value in their own business in a way that actually lands?
It's a fascinating question, because it's actually part of my instant answer would be it's about the buyers saying this is what they want. I want that long-term relationship. I want the value. I want the discovery, because it's costly for me to keep swapping horses. It's costly for me to keep reevaluating. I mean, yes, there's technical innovation. That aside, that's not a salesperson problem. It's not even per se a company problem. There will be always a disruptor in that sense. But the reality, part of me thinks, Marcus, it's about the customer saying enough's enough. This is costing us a bunch of money. So we want different. We want sustainability. We want deep relationships. We want vulnerability, because we're not brilliant as organizations that buy from you. We've got things that we get wrong. We don't quite get it right. So that on one level, I think, is the answer that will change things. A couple of great people that you introduced me to. So, Frank Sepsis over at Harvard, he was saying, I've never heard a salesperson want to be deemed as professional and have a qualification. No, salesperson will never tell you that, because in the last 3 decades, it's all been about the number. But buyers are telling you that, because every single other part of their life, they look for markers of trust. Trustpilot is a brilliant one. The moment you started talking, I'm thinking, well, why do we go through Trustpilot? And why do we do Trustpilot or Bazaar Voice or anything else? And it's like, because we want to show as a company, organizationally, post-sale, people who put their trust in us still feel that was a trustworthy transaction. Great, but isn't, again, that just a quick, cheap way? No disrespect to Trustpilot, but isn't that a quick, cheap way of saying we'll get to trustworthiness, to your long answer to your question? Well, no, kind of people behaving in a certain way and showing those markers of trust in their personal brand, certifications, qualifications, continuous professional development, ethical and standard alignment. That's what stands out, because that's what every other part of our working world and domestic world hinges on. You don't go and see a doctor without those things. You don't go and see a lawyer without those things, or have your tax return redone without those things. You don't even have your car mended without those signs. But in sales, we're trying to catch up, but we're trying to catch up again. But it's just, look, we've got 4.5 stars. Yeah, right. But there's a more sustainable way of doing this. And some organizations are really starting to grab hold of this and go, yeah, it's about professional. It's not just about professionalism. It's about professional formation. It's about me as an individual understanding how all these elements fit together, my role in driving those formation elements, and your role as an organization to give me that leadership and that psychologically safe environment for me to be able to make mistakes as I go through that formation journey. And buyers will then embrace that, because that's what they're looking for. A corporate buyer doesn't leave all their consumer bias at the door. It goes in with them.
Well, again, this circles back to something you and I have talked about in the past, which is that in the days of yore, you'd go on an apprenticeship, and sales has lost that. The number of millennial and Gen Z salespeople who have ride-alongs with their boss. I can count on the fingers of one finger in the last 20 years.
Yeah.
The idea that salespeople are able to hit their full stride after 90 days is ludicrous. When Phil McGowan did his PhD, what he found from that is it takes 3.2 years for a salesperson to hit full stride. Now, the turnover of the typical salesperson, sales manager, sales leader, CRO suggests that no one ever gets to hit their full stride. And if people are being punished, like your friend's son and a dozen or so of my clients, for focusing on actually doing good work instead of showing that they are busy doing dead work, seems to be symptomatic. And that then speaks to the question about alignment in the go-to-market function. So marketing, and I worked on a project last year where 18 months before we were called in, marketing had been given budget and a target to up the number of leads at the top of the funnel. And you could see a linear relation with the level of activity going up and the level of productivity going down, because sales were spending their time talking to the total addressable market, i.e. anyone with a pulse, as opposed to the serviceable obtainable market in their ICP,
Yeah.
and aligning with those people. Now, when people focus on the serviceable obtainable market and only spend time trying to identify ideal customers and building relationships deep and wide across a number of points of contact within the organization over time, weirdly enough, they end up, I'm thinking of one client in particular. He had an 86% close rate selling cold into displacement sales, whilst his peers had a 9% close rate selling into the installed base.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, it's about value, isn't it? We talked about how you articulate value for the client in outcomes. Back to leadership, did they value? And I don't think salespeople are valued by their own companies. I think that actually comes to a lot of the problem. And when we say I'm expecting buyers to be part of the answer, but interestingly, those buyers sit in a company probably with a sales force of their own. And what I find mystifying is why don't they turn around and go, when I buy from our suppliers, this is what I value. Do you go and do that? And they actually go, no, I mean, this lot don't do it. So our lot won't do it. So fundamentally, it's, they're all untrustworthy. And you go, well, actually, if you valued them, then they'd value themselves. Then they'd value their time, to your point, and they'd use that time wisely with the right customers. And then the customers would realize value out of that. And it all comes from, we don't value sales. And everyone says, yeah, we do. They're the lifeblood of our economy. Yeah, right. You don't really.
Ninth after paper clips.
Yeah.
Well, you've touched on something really critical. I often talk about buyer safety, but over the last couple of years, what I've realized is as important is seller safety. And if sellers don't feel psychologically safe pushing back, identifying what isn't working, and instead they are punished and seen as troublemakers, fired for raising difficult questions, then what we see, and I'm just finishing my manuscript on this, what I see is these systemic problems turn into little compromises that gather and compound. And over time, it just becomes the way we do things around here. And anyone who dares to challenge it is then seen as slowing things down. They are seen as a risk, as a troublemaker. And they're often the ones put on a pip. And the ones who get promoted are the ones who comply, are complicit, and are willing to compromise not only their values, but also do things that are not in either the company's or the customer's best interests. And they then get promoted into management. So the whole vicious circle is compounded again.
Yeah, yes. And psychological safety, Amy C. Edmondson had to rewrite in the Harvard Business Review last year that effectively she'd got it wrong. Also, she hadn't got it wrong, she got it right. People have misunderstood what psychological safety is. And the reality about it is the pressure on sales managers has created an unpsychological safe environment. Pressure on numbers, performance improvement plans, just behavior in forecast calls, language like, if this was my deal, I know what you should do, driven by macho cultures of This is how you coach. I've read the Alex Ferguson book. All of it is not what psychological safe environments are. Psychological safe environments are, if I make a mistake, you'll call it out. And you go, Andy, that's not your best piece of work. It isn't what you should have done in that environment. However, if you want, let's sit down and go through it together and we'll figure out ways to how to improve it or it doesn't happen next time. That's psychological safety. And if you didn't do something quite well enough or you had a question, you'd get the same back. That's what psychological safety is. And that's gone. And that can only be brought back by a close manager-seller relationship. And you mentioned rideouts. I got to know things about my manager. He got to know things about me because we had times in the car. And we had that time to get to know each other. And, he did things for me that were life-changing at the time in that, he cared. And you look at it now, and again, how much does a sales manager care about the salespeople? Now, I don't mean they're being deliberately malicious and getting rid of them it's not intentional. They don't get up to go, how can I beat a salesperson? They're under a huge amount of pressure with very, very little time themselves. So they get squashed because the sales leaders are squashed because, the C-suite basically are driving a business. And unfortunately, this comes back to shareholder value, shareholder need, and CEO. Most CEOs, particularly in the UK, have never been in sales. So again, I was out with another person earlier this week, and he was talking about a CEO. To your point, I moved on from that role because I didn't want to rattle the boat. He wants people around him to kind of see things the way he sees them. And I just went, well, what was it? Oh, CFO. Has he ever spent time with the top customer? And the guy went, no, he doesn't want to know. Doesn't want to have to talk about operations. Doesn't want to have to spend time with customers. That's not what he wants to do. But isn't everybody in the company meant to be spending time with clients?
You'd think. So that then brings, there are two questions. So let me start with this one. Player managers. I understand it in a very small organization where you've got a number that you have to hit or to keep the lights on. But as an organization grows, more often than not, I see middle management carrying a quota as well as having a team. And the pattern that inevitably occurs is when the end of the quarter arrives, the manager goes out of the window and the player comes to the fore and they focus on hitting their number. And it also has a ripple effect that the player manager will often then take the best leads. They will come in and play the hero and close the deal. And that does not transfer skill and it doesn't build confidence or psychological safety. So if managers find themselves going for jobs where they are expected to be a player manager, what advice would you give?
Don't do it. I think player manager has a great role to play if you are a player manager within a team that already has a manager and what you're doing is developing your management skills. So it's a stepping stone into management. You're getting your feet wet and you're doing it with one, maybe two people. If you are going to be a player manager and you are not, you're hired into that role or that role happens upon you because of various other things, you're not one of them. Always, as you said, you're always going to get caught between the two, and you're never going to be able to spend the quality of time to value your salespeople the way that they need to be valued and value their development. You're never going to be able to be creating a psychologically safe place because you never get the time to reflect. You're just constantly on a treadmill. You're either trying to get to find out what's going on with them or you're trying to do your own thing. And with so many moving parts, so easy to say, yeah, well, you need to segment that and you need to be rigid about your time and allocate. Yeah, with so many things that change, that's a little bit unrealistic to expect people to be able to say no to a customer who just needs to change the diary issue. So don't do it.
So, well, you've also touched on something else, which is that managers' time is being squeezed from below, from above. Now, managers who are spending their time stuck in meetings, dealing with reports, being spreadsheet jockeys, scanning the CRM, trying to forecast, are spending their time on activities that are non-value creating. They're administrative to a large extent, and they are trying to serve a different job to the one that the manager has to deliver on. The purpose of a manager is to equip their own people in order to succeed. And if you're spending 80-90% of your time stuck in meetings and filling out reports, you can't possibly do the coaching. You can't do the ride along. So there's no windscreen training. You can't coach. And most of them, if they are coaching, And I think my sales coach released a study about 3 or 4 months ago where 70, 80% of managers were convinced they were coaching, but fewer than 30% of their people believed that they were receiving any coaching.
Yeah, I saw that. Yeah.
So there is this massive disconnect and a misunderstanding in terms of what coaching is and isn't. So let's address that. What is coaching in the context of sales?
Coaching is the understanding and realization in any context that there is about 50 to 60 different types of coaching. And coaching in sales is right the way down the bottom end of it. It is not the life-changing coaching around your future and all of those things, because that requires somebody who's highly qualified, probably a psychologist. Sales coaching is about trying to understand the barriers that get in a salesperson's way to them being the very best version of themselves that they can be. And that normally looks at some of the behavior fears, normally looks at some of the skill deficiencies, and then your role is to help them identify actions by which they will own to, and you support, but they will own to overcome those fears, overcome those skill deficiencies, and you then arrange consistently time to help them reflect on their improvement, on their learning, and figure out where they'll implement things that worked quicker and things that didn't work, what their reflection is, and maybe they don't do them again. That is, for the first 6 months, a relationship where the coachee will be very skeptical that is actually going to happen, because they'll think it becomes around a forecast or a pipeline review at some point. But once they come through that and realize it's about them, it becomes one of the most powerful tools a sales leader can deploy. And it's all about coaching. It's all about then, because you're back at value. If you're starting to talk about me and it's me, then isn't that the first line of an organization saying we value you because we care about you? And it comes back to the great Simon Sinek video, Marcus, which is sales is like dating. Well, isn't sales management like dating? Yeah, we all love to talk about ourselves because we feel warm and fuzzy and valued because people care.
Well, I interviewed David Weiss about 4 or 5 years ago, and he said something that stuck with me, which is that managers need to love their salespeople. The idea is that love is not soft. Love is not compromising, and love is tough. Having difficult conversations with people is part of the job. Another fantastic quote is that every time you answer a question, you steal a learning opportunity. And I think too often managers think that coaching is telling. It isn't. It's anything but. It's asking questions in order that the other person works it out. And when they get it wrong, you ask more questions so that they eventually work it out correctly for themselves. It takes patience.
Well, we talked about that a little bit earlier, isn't it? If it was me, I would do this. And that's the biggest way to destroy psychological safety. And it's the biggest way to devolve the salesperson from learning. Because what it says is, actually, Marcus walks out the room and says, well, this isn't my deal anymore. This is Andy's deal. And if this doesn't work out, it wasn't my fault because that's what he said he'd do. So I just did it. It's like, no. So what do you think that you should be doing in this circumstance? Okay. What do you think are the possible reactions to that action and those things that you're going to do? Have you thought about those things? Brilliant. Okay. Now you've thought about those things and you've deciphered which is the route that is the most attractive and logical for you to take and the most beneficial for the client. When are we going to sit down and see how it goes? That's a very different conversation, but it requires a lot more emotional energy. And even if you can squeeze the time in, the challenge that you've got is, can you find those reserves of emotional energy in a very, very hectic world of sales? And the answer to that is, I might find 15 minutes, but I'm not going to find half an hour, which is going to help me find the right emotional energy to give that relationship time.
Well, I hear many managers say, oh, well, I don't have time to coach. Well, the reason you don't have time to coach is you're not coaching. So how do we get managers equipped so that they can carve out the time and keep it sacrosanct? Because one of the other things that I see as a pattern is over and over again, the time that is scheduled for coaching is sacrificed for something urgent.
I think the first question is how do you help them fall in love with it? So if you do the things you love, yeah?
Yeah.
Okay, there's a pressure on you to do the things that you don't love, but it's a necessity. So you take CRM out of that because no one's sitting around and going, whoa, I've got another opportunity to do CRM. But you do the things you love, so they've got to fall in love with it. And I can't keep. I just can't. I play it in class at Cranfield. The more sales is like dating, and unfortunately, over these last decades, and particularly now in this decade, as the young people come in, and you get these concepts around social selling and digital selling and all of these other things, it's become even worse because fundamentally we've forgotten the capability to date. We've forgotten the capability to be human. And as a consequence of that, we've forgotten the fundamental, as you said right at the top, of the oldest profession on the planet, which is human interaction to trade goods, money, or time, or whatever for an economic outcome for both parties, or a good valued outcome for both parties. And the challenge is it's human, and we've forgotten that. We don't give the time for the cognitive research and behavior that is needed, and we just continue to treat it as a numbers and technology game. And I think we've run out of time on that. I think now the headwinds are hitting us really hard. Buyers have shifted on us. AI has shifted completely in the last year, and most sales organizations have missed it by a country mile. And it's like your buyer is digitally enabled, AI enabled. So how the LinkedIn's everything now in terms of information to a degree is a commodity, apart from the relationship you have as a human being with the human on the other side, where you give them energy, you give them value, and they really want to give you that time because they're going to get something out of it. And I wasn't always the best salesperson, but I was authentic, I was genuine, and I genuinely cared. And I made mistakes, and people will forgive you mistakes if you are authentic, genuine, and genuinely care, because they're not malicious and they're not sinister. And they'll let you go, you know what, I shouldn't have sent that pricing because I was just rushed, didn't hit the right button. All of those things, because we're all human. We're fine with all of those things. But we've just been hijacked by everything and forgotten. It's about human beings having relationships with human beings. And fundamentally, that's what buyers want.
I've spent a lot of time over the last 7 years in particular researching decision safety and how do we create decisions where the half-life of that decision isn't creating a downstream ripple effect that causes harm. Because so to use the example of the marketing being given the target and the budget, they'd double the number of leads to something like 3,000 a month across a team of 10. They had to follow up with 300 leads each per month. And obviously with get-through rates and whatever else, it was basically a lottery and a numbers game. And sales is anything but a numbers game. And I think we create this illusion that busyness and activity turn into the desired outcome. And it creates taxes all the way along the ecosystem. So you have trust taxes, you have psychological safety taxes. And what ends up happening is we compound busy work, and that then takes us away from real work, where we're in front of real customers who could buy, but probably won't be in the market to buy now. If the data's to be believed, 95% of your target market is not in the market to buy your stuff today. So the fixation on short-term pipeline is another significant catalyst to all of this. So one of the things I always teach my clients is focus on your medium to long-term pipeline. Don't try and focus in the blood red sea that where they're going to buy in the next 0 to 6 months. Focus on the 6 to 36 months, which is a blue ocean. There's no competition. You've got time to build relationships across multiple points of contact and different functions, and you can bring together and join the dots, because I think real leadership is about joining the dots and creating connections between the components.
But if you're a salesperson, you're sitting there going, you know what, I'm probably not going to be here in 36 months or 24 months. I certainly, if I don't hit a number, won't have that opportunity. No one cares because that's not a metric that CRM is tracking. And someone will tell me that 33% of companies fail in 3 years. So my customer might not even be around, because there is a huge swathe of different kind of buyers and companies now. I'm not arguing with you, but that's the reality, isn't it? Everyone goes, I don't care about that because I'm not paid. I'm not paid today on what you're doing for 36 months. And I see myself do it, with some of the people in the Institute or Cranfield. It's like, quite rightly, you should be looking longer term, but that's not how we're getting measured.
The work that I do is typically on those who are selling complex decisions that have lasting ramifications. So I absolutely accept if you're in a transactional business, that the turnover is very fast, it's low ticket. But if someone's selling something for 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 figures, odds are a lot of people are going to be affected. And I think one of the things that salespeople almost never pay any attention to is the fact that the buyer has to live with the outcome long after the salesperson has sold and run. And they have to take the value proposition internally,
Yeah.
and it has to make it through the second and third room. And
Yeah.
almost nobody pays any attention to the fact that internally within the buyer organization, if you have a champion, chances are they're spending the next 3, 4, 5, 10 weeks fighting internally. And this buying process is like a bowl of spaghetti. It's got nothing to do with your linear CRM process that's gated and nice and clean. So the idea that you can push people, buyers, through that process, what we have to do is we have to create an understanding where CRM is aligned with the buying process, not our sales process. And the problem that I see is that you try and force the customer to buy at your time of choosing. Well, you're going to undermine all the trust that you've invested time in.
Yeah, it is true. And yeah, it's an interestingly complex world. And I think we're at the crossroads now or the fork in the road, where some people will go thinking about it in a different way. And I keep coming back to the phrase of sustainable sales, as opposed to we'll go the other way, which is we'll just keep chasing numbers. And that'll work for so long until the number just break. And then somebody says, well, what are we going to do? Well, you need a sustainable sales ecosystem. And that is predominantly based about the relationship between people, you and your salespeople and the salespeople, and your customers, their customers. And it will come back to that. And there'll be a good understanding of short-term versus long-term and how you balance that and how people look at that progression through there. And then how do you keep people around long enough to do it? Well, you value them.
Yeah. Andy, we've come to time, unfortunately. If you had a golden ticket and you could whisper in the ear of the idiot Andy, age 23, 24, what one bit of advice would you give him?
It would be that don't lose the ability to connect with the human side of people and put them at the center of what you do, because people above all want energy. They want to deal with people that they like, and they want to deal with people that understand the business that they're in and can add value. So do not put people at the center of everything that you do for the next 30 years.
Excellent. Andy Hough, thank you.
Thank you.
How can people get hold of you?
Come find me at the ISP. So just drop me a LinkedIn message, or come find me on the ISP website. It's all about conversations. And if people kind of are a little bit interested in wanting to figure out which fork in the road that they take, then yeah, I'd love to have the conversation, and we can see what happens in the next few years.
So this is Marcus Cauchi signing off once again from the Inquisitor Podcast. If you found this useful, then please like, comment, and share. And please come back, take notes, get in contact with either me or Andy. And remember, sales isn't distrusted because sellers forgot how to sell. It's distrusted because companies have built systems that make trust uneconomic. And when system rewards speed, compliance, short-term numbers, it creates pipeline theater. And pipeline theater is really a trust problem. There's a causal chain. Pressure from shareholders leads to leadership pressure. That then creates forecast commit rituals, this obsession with activity, and typically very shallow discovery, forcing the timing of the purchase. And that drives buyers out of your pipeline and creates distrust. And then downstream, CS and operations and finance pick up the pieces through churn and discounting and weakened balance sheet. And that lowers shareholder value. That's the loop that we're creating. So think really carefully before you decide to put your customers under pressure. Think really carefully before you agree to go back to a customer and try and bring a deal over the line in order to try and meet your IPO objectives, as opposed to because it's right for the customer. Our job in sales is to help our customers make the right decision for themselves and for them to be able to live with the outcome and to de-risk that decision for them. So this is Marcus Cauchi signing off once again from the Inquisitor Podcast. If you found this insightful and useful, then please like, comment, and share. and tag somebody who could benefit from it. In the meantime, stay safe and happy selling. Bye-bye.